Hi, I'm Matt Muns, the president of Advanced Global Resources based out of Irving, Texas. Today, we're having a discussion with Harish Gannavarapu, who is our director of SAP Cloud Infrastructure. This is one of our profiles in leadership. We're going to be talking with Harish today about the methodology we use to move SAP applications into the hyperscaler clouds like the Google Cloud Platform or like Microsoft Azure. So with that, Harish, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about your background and your experience with SAP over your long career?
Sure, Matt. So my name is Harish Gannavarapu, and I'm the director for SAP Cloud Practice. And I have 27 years of IT experience, out of which 24 years is in SAP, and then 3 years is in networking. And I've done almost 12 implementations and 5 upgrades and 6 migrations. And I've worked with almost 20 different customers in different industries, from aerospace to food and beverages, utilities, oil and gas, and gaming, and hotels, and pretty much all kinds of industries.
I mean, let's just talk generally with our audience a little bit today. What are the general challenges? I mean, you've been in the SAP practice, the SAP world for a long time now, but moving SAP into the hyperscaler clouds is a relatively new trend over the last few years. This is new for a lot of companies. This hasn't been going on for 20 years, let's say. But let's just talk generally about the challenges customers face as they move from on-prem systems into the hyperscaler clouds. And maybe let's just talk about the challenge you'd see that are not unique to any one cloud infrastructure, but across all of them.
Sure. The challenge is basically how they begin with the assessment. So if the assessment is very keen thing that needs to be done. So if their SAP and non-SAP applications, if they don't do the suitability and the compatibility matrix correctly, and then if they have not done that due diligence correctly, so it will have implications to the project. It will have long timing, and it takes for the customers to get the project implemented correctly.
So, and what are some of those common pitfalls as you're going through your assessment, which is really the discover, explore phase in SAP, terminology? What are some of those pitfalls that companies make?
So the one of the biggest thing is so as there's the choice of the partners that they usually the customers either for the compliance sake or for the sake of the choice, they go with the bigger implementation partners, and that's the and then expect that things are smooth and everything is taken care. But most of the cases, what I see was that that's not done completely, but they do have the basic requirements and just hand over the work to the customers. But what happens then is that after the implementation is done, so there'll be issues with the implementation or the migrations, and now the customer has to go back, hire additional resources to get the work done. And so I've seen this happening time and again.
Yeah, I think any of us that have been in this business for a long time see that. Just because you roll out a name brand, large implementation partner, doesn't mean you get the best talent. They usually use highly leveraged models. I think it's something that really differentiates AGR. We bring people with an average of 18 years of experience to the engagement, folks like yourself that have even more than that, leading engagements. So we're a less highly leveraged model, but we bring more senior expertise, get work done right the first time. But let's just talk. Let's pick one example pitfall when they're looking to design their migration. What's one of the things that's overlooked the first that ends up adding time, adding costs on the back end of that project?
So the thing that most probably is in terms of costing, they see a huge difference when they migrate to the cloud, and they say, oh, the cloud was supposed to be cheaper, but because the optimization was not done during the implementation itself, and then they end up like, so some of the things like, you have a when they are trying to choose to how they do which model, pricing model that they have to choose. So the biggest thing that they forget is that, the 70% of their workloads is non-production. Okay, so with that being said, like, they go on in a 3-year agreement with that. So what happens with that is basically, now even if you downsize your workloads later on, so you don't really get any advantage of it. So the other route that they really can take is basically shutting down. Instead of running 24/7 their non-production environment, they can run like 10/5. That means 10 hours, five days a week. So that will save them at least 70 to 80% of their cost.
Yeah. So really understanding the discover, explore through our assessment phase, how to optimize the workload so they don't enter into contracts that are scaled too large for them, and then really thinking critically about your non-production environments. I think most companies, we're all focused on our production environments because that's what runs our business.
Exactly.
But as you pointed out, 70% of the space is taken up by non-production systems. So really understanding how to balance the non-production space is critical, and that's no value add, right? I mean, there's very little value add in your test, your QA. Let's talk a little bit about how you view the disaster recovery as part of that non-production workload.
Yeah, so that's one of the common mistake that I've seen with the customers is how they provision their DR. So what happens is like they will provision the half of their DR, because either the hyperscalers lure into saying, okay, if you want to save costs, so why don't you just provision the half of your hardware now, and then you can bump it up when you really get into a situation of a DR, right? But the missing piece there is that, that it's not guaranteed. Even if you reserve, you are still in the line for getting your hardware provisioned when the disaster happens. But remember one thing, where like if DR really happens, they go by, who is the big pocket, right? Basically, if Walmart comes and asks you for 100 servers, you have to give them first before though you are reserved, you're still in the line for next. But instead, customers should really opt out doing the cost-optimized way of DR provisioning, where you can leverage your DR hardware for the pre-production. So that will, also give you a much more flexibility for doing the DR test anytime you require. And then while the production is up, you can set it up in such a way that you can do that. And also it gives you extra capability of, checking the certain patches or some certain bug fix before you are not sure putting it into the production.
Yeah.
So it's a huge saving because you are leveraging the compute, and considering the HANA instances these days, they are very expensive. So you don't want to just provision it and leave it there. So you really wanted to optimize your DR for your pre-production or quality work.
Yeah. So I mean, your approach to this not only is cost optimization. It's really making sure that your disaster recovery is ready from day one and not relying on your cloud infrastructure partner to get you into the right DR backup if they're having a larger outage. And again, your company could be deprioritized. You're really leveraging all those non-production assets to both lower cost and provide disaster recovery.
Yeah,
so I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, and that is another thing which, like, your pre-production is closer to the your production most of the cases. So you have a good sense of feeling and how it will behave when you really provision your production workloads on the DR. So you have pretty much a lot of the nuts and bolts tested out in pre-production environment. Get your everything ready. So you don't have to scramble at the last minute.
So switching over to the Azure side, Microsoft, was probably the first hyperscaler really to start embracing, hosting S/4HANA and SAP applications. Let's talk about some of your experience with migrating to the Azure cloud.
So I've done both. Technically, like Azure-wise, so we started off at KDP and on Azure, planning everything on Azure, and we did all that, and then customers decided to go to GCP. That was a thing. But I also did a greenfield implementation for a Becton and Dickinson. It's a global implementation. So they were consolidating their three of their ECC and also JD Edwards to one consolidated box for the worldwide. So we had almost 450 workloads that was deployed within 7 months time frame. And then including the DR testing and everything. So it was done very with all the best practices implemented and everything. So Azure definitely gave us all the mapping of the workloads and how do you choose your VMs and everything. This was laid out very nicely, and then pretty much I mean, it was a great experience, and the tools all worked as planned, and definitely I would say we had very less challenges, but definitely because Azure was ready for all these implementations, and now especially with the integration with AD and those stuff were straightforward. So that's
When you talked about interfaces a minute ago, and so now in the Dickinson, migration, you're not only migrating, ECC, SAP applications, but you're also migrating an Oracle application and connecting them. So interfaces must have been a big part of that planning methodology you went through.
Yeah, so the thing that at Becton Dickinson, so we had very less of Oracle. It's all on HANA. So, but the challenge that we faced was it in GCP, but GCP was not able to support Oracle on GCP. So they were supposed to go on a co-location, and we had different options there. But definitely, when it did, when we did, so we also, I mean, the interfaces now changes from the standalone components to all cloud solutions like SuccessFactor, Enable Now. So these are, so those were also interesting scenarios where it was still like it was smooth, and we were able to connect the customer into all their BTP, like for the VAS solution, the Business Application Studio, and their Enable Now and advanced correction reports, and so pretty much there is CPI. So yeah, it's an interesting journey, and but definitely there also it's like a cloud when you're trying to connect to the cloud. So you need to take security into concern. So you have to make sure that all the connectivity going into the cloud, even within SAP's cloud itself. So and there is a single sign-on implemented, and it becomes seamless. That's the important piece. So SSO plays a vital role when we are trying to migrate all these systems and trying to consolidate, and then trying to give users a single point of access. And so we wanted to make sure that there is a seamless connectivity, and then by implementing, we implemented SSO server for Becton Dickinson for Azure AD. So we all you need to remember is one user ID, and then the entire thing can be like you can successfully log into all of their applications. So we had almost close to 17 components of SAP, and it was authentication was seamless to the end user.
Yeah, that single sign-on is important, and again, it's also important for security. It's one of the the benefits that you can leverage out of Azure natively, and I think you talk a little bit about native backup options being important for customers to think about as well.
Yeah, so the Azure, the native backup is like now all the hyperscalers provide a native backup option, so which is considered much cheaper, and it's straightforward for implementation purposes. So customers, I think, should take a note of that kind of option rather than going for a third party and then paying license and then paying for infrastructure. So whereas you have a native option which is no infrastructure and it's cheaper. Like, just take an example of Azure. So Azure will charge you for for every 500 GB instance VM size. It'll charge you $10 as the service cost plus the storage. The storage is equal whether you do it there, but being on the cloud, the storage you can pretty much send it to a lesser expensive storage, like they call it as cold storage. So you can move the archiving stuff over to, like, if you want to retain for a longer period, you can move it to the cloud. The cold
Yeah, cold
storage.
storage.
Yeah, so that will reduce the cost. Whereas if you are doing it on the data center, that's pretty much expensive because they don't have that option. And yeah, the customers have to leverage the cloud native backup tools, and which are they're also certified, and definitely that's one of the cost saving option for the customer.
So outside of leveraging those native, cloud backup tools, is there anything else that customers should be thinking about, load balancing, anything like that, to really optimize their infrastructure from a cost perspective?
Yes, so a lot of the customers, there are a lot of load balancing things that you have to, options that you have to do. Especially, it's not just the end user coming in through login through their GUI or through their front end, like the Fiori. That's not only the load balancing or even the RFC load balancing. Right? There is a end user load balancing, and then the RFC load balancing, and then the HTTP load balancing. Most of the cases that I've seen is like HTTP load balancing and RFC load balancing is overlooked. Okay, so that causes the servers getting overloaded, and then you might have like 10 app servers, but it's not if it is not properly load balanced. So you're just paying for the app servers just for the sake of the GUI load balancing and the RFC load balancing. Even with the RFC load balancing, you have to really design RFC load balancing separately, not as mixed with the GUI load balancing, because RFC load balancing works slightly different, and that's because your systems are communicating mainly through HTTP or RFC. So if you're not taking care of those, properly design those, then your systems are not being optimally used, and so that can, you're spending, but it's not taken care of.
You're not getting advantage of it. Yeah, absolutely. And load balancing is something we look at right up front as we're going through the assessment. These are all areas that we focus on, in our assessment methodology to help our customers, not only optimize their applications in the cloud, but will also be really, cost sensitive or cost aware as we're helping them send that up. You should be able to reduce your infrastructure costs by moving to the cloud. You should be able to get better security by moving to the cloud. You should be able to get better performance.
Yes.
But all of that only happens if
everything is done right.
If everything's done right, and that starts with your assessment, our discover, explore, design phase right up front. And then you and your team take care of the rest from there.
So that's where HDR comes into picture. So for a lot of the customers, so you have done already implemented, and your implementation partner is gone. So now we can come in and we can do assessment and look at it and say, oh, here are all the gaps that you should take care of these to get better advantage of the cloud. In terms of cost saving, cost optimization. So where are all the gaps, and how do we make this thing complete with all the best practices implemented? So we can walk into we can work with the ongoing implementations or new implementation. We can work on side by side to the customer from the customer side to make sure that the implementation partner they choose is doing things right, and so they're not leaving them hanging, and then customer has to go back and spend more money to correct those things which are left undone. So
absolutely. Those advisory services, whether they're up front or were brought in later after the fact to help optimize. A lot of people think about when they implement infrastructure and applications that's the end of your IT journey. Really, that's the beginning. From there, you should continue to increase performance across both. And again, that's an area that we excel in, helping on both the infrastructure and the application side. Really, having companies harness the full power of their applications and the cloud infrastructure and achieve the return on investment they should be getting out of their overall IT infrastructure.
Yes,
We really like to view it as as not a cost center, but as a savings center for the organization if it's done right. Well, Harish, thank you very much. I appreciate you sharing your decades of expertise and deep experience, dealing with multiple hyperscaler platforms and the SAP applications that you and your team migrate and natively implement there. I think the takeaway for our customers is always, you need to think about security end to end as you do this. You need to make sure that your workload is optimized when you're putting this infrastructure in, so you don't over provision and get stuck with additional costs. And then you really need to think about those non-production environments that are 70% of your overall footprint, and how you can utilize them as part of your disaster recovery plan. So we want to mitigate risk with disaster recovery. We want to mitigate risk through security, and we want to optimize the infrastructure to really get the full benefit of the cost of these hyperscaler clouds. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you.